I admitted I was wrong. For years I've been making fun of how much hair gel Chris puts in his hair before every single shoot. But on reviewing the footage from this episode, I realized he was right, and I was wrong. Time to go buy some hair gel.
Welcome back, Deep Review TV viewers. It is Chris Nichols here, and tonight we are taking a full look on the video capabilities of the Sony a7S III. We have a full production unit to play with tonight, and I know what you're saying. Well, if it's a video review, where's Jordan? You're going to get Jordan very shortly. I just want to cover a couple things first. So first off, we already did a first impressions video on the Sony a7S III. We covered a lot of the menus, the new touchscreen capabilities, the new body, so we're not going to touch on that stuff tonight. But I also want to talk just very briefly about some of the photo capabilities of this camera. Now, the Sony a7S III body handles beautifully, and the sensor does give you advantages when it comes to incredibly good dynamic range, as well as excellent high ISO performance in low light situations. But although those are standout features, I don't think it's standout enough to warrant this being a photographic-based camera. I really think if you're getting into stills, there's better options in the Sony lineup for you. But if you are a videographer and you want to get the occasional still, certainly the image quality here is beautiful. You get incredible autofocus, and I think you'll enjoy it. Anyways, this is the last you're going to hear from me tonight. Let's get to the video review with Jordan.
All right, everyone, Jordan here to talk about using the a7S III to shoot video, and I've been fortunate enough to use it to shoot a few of our episodes. Our new A to E mount adapter episode, as well as our Z5 versus RP, were shot on the a7S III, so you can check those for more image samples. But I want to talk about what this camera is like in good light first. Now, right now we're using the Cine 2 profile. I really like using this in low contrast shoots, but you can see it's bright, we got a lot of contrast, so let's switch to S-Log and talk about dynamic range. Okay, so now we've jumped over to S-Log 2, and this is a much flatter image coming out of the camera. This is really as far as I would have pushed any of the Sony mirrorless cameras before. You had the option of using S-Log 3, but it was just too flat for the 8-bit profiles that they had in those. However, now we've got a 10-bit internal profile, so let's jump over to S-Log 3. So now with S-Log 3, we have tons of dynamic range in this, and unlike some of the other cameras, I haven't run into any issues where I'm seeing any kind of banding in the sky, anything like that. So if you need a lot of dynamic range and you're okay to spend a little bit of time grading, S-Log 3 is very usable on this. So dynamic range is excellent, but what about the actual sharpness of the video? Remember, we just have a 12 megapixel sensor on this, where a lot of the other cameras coming out are super sampling from higher resolution. And yeah, maybe it's just because I've been looking at R5 footage and S1H footage, but the a7S III is noticeably softer than those, and that's kind of the trade-off. Great low light, excellent dynamic range, but if you're looking for the sharpest possible picture, this isn't it. However, that 12 megapixel sensor does really help us when it comes to rolling shutter, because it can just read out faster. Now, Sony said that this camera could read out twice as fast as the a7S II, and they actually totally undersold it. Once we actually tested it, it reads out more than 3 times as fast as that, making it some of the fastest scanning you're going to find in a camera right now. So if you're doing any kind of work where there's whip pans in it, this camera is going to be an awesome choice. But you can hear me say that, now you need to see it in motion. Follow me, Chris! One of the biggest advantages of the a7S III over the a7S II is that we do have phase detect autofocus on this using the wonderful real-time tracking autofocus. Now, you do have to touch the screen to initialize it. It's a bit of a pain, but once it's activated, it does a great job whether your subject's moving or the camera's moving. This is really designed to be used when you've got a lot of movement in the frame. In fact, the only time I've had any troubles with it is in what should be a less demanding situation where we've got a static subject and a static camera. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so now we've got the camera locked off, a static subject, and we're shooting it in log, and this is where I found I've had all my issues. Now, it could be doing a great job. Most of the time it does, but I think it has something to do with the lower contrast of the log profile and the camera always looking for activity that it'll sometimes flutter. Now, you can turn down the sensitivity in the menus, but mostly I want this to work at its default setting. It's annoying it does this. Now, I did find a workaround. I've been complaining for a while that Sony cameras don't give you an AFS where it'll just focus once and then leave the focus there. However, with this, put your camera in manual focus, tap the AF on button, it'll focus on your subject, even using eye detect if it sees an eye, and it'll leave it there. It's perfect for situations like this, and that's what I've been using for pretty much all of my static shots lately. So let's talk about everyone except Chris's favorite topic, which is compressions and codec. Now, we listed a lot of those in the previous video and talked about them, but now that people are actually getting their hands on the camera, I'm hearing this all the time, this camera is destroying my computer. The files are so demanding to edit on it, and that's absolutely true. If you use the new H.265 XAVC HS files, very small files, tons of information in them, but they're extremely demanding on your computer to edit. Fortunately, they still have the older XAVC S files on this, easier to edit. Also, they've got the new XAVC SI. Now, these aren't huge files if you're shooting standard 24 and 30 frame per second, but very easy to edit, and it's all eye compression, so you don't have to worry about any motion compression. That's what I've been shooting everything on. So one of the best things about the a7S III is its slow motion capabilities, and I do really recommend if you're just planning to shoot 4K 120 or 4K 60 for slow-mo, use the new S&Q mode dial. That's going to save them in nice 24, 30, or 60 frame per second file. Easy to edit, and you can watch them in camera in slow motion, make sure you got what you want. But if you need to capture 4K 120 or 4K 60 with audio, say for speed ramping, or you're not sure which parts you're going to slow down, just be prepared, that's going to be very hard on your computer. These are Calgary's famous Coolidge family chairs. Now, these were built back in 1876, back when most people were still shooting 1080p video. Now, a lot of us have moved on from that, but if you do need to shoot 1080 on this, rest assured it's the best 1080 quality you're going to see on any of the Sony mirrorless cameras. Usually it's not great coming off those, but here, shooting anywhere from 24 frames per second all the way up to 120, you're getting the same outstanding quality on it. It's only when you push it to 1080 240 that you see a quality drop, but even then it's some of the nicest 1080 240 I've seen. So Chris and I went and grabbed a little bit of dinner while we wait for the light levels to drop a little bit. So we're going to be shooting progressively higher ISOs for the rest of this video. So keep an eye on it. We're going to display that for you. But as well as getting darker, it's also getting colder. So I want to talk about overheating to think about heat. It's going to help me out quite a bit. So overheating is not a problem on this camera. I shot 24 and 30 frames per second. Got well over 2.5 hours on both of them before the battery died, and I wasn't even seeing the overheat warning on camera. Now, it can overheat if you're shooting some of the higher frame rates. If you shoot 4K 120 for well over a half an hour, we're seeing reports from Max Yuryev that it can overheat. On the same token, though, that's kind of a special effect. I wouldn't shoot continuously at 120 frames per second unless I'm Ang Lee, so I don't think you're going to run into overheating issues if you're in Canada. If it's 40 degrees Celsius, I have no information for you. I'm sorry, check out Dan Watson's channel. Now, one of the biggest headline features of the a7S III is its incredibly high-resolution electronic viewfinder. It's well over 9 million dots. The optics are excellent in it. But I can't help it. Every single time I shoot a clip with this and then I flip over and play it back, you can see the quality is way better when you're playing back than when you're actually shooting. It's much more detailed, much sharper. When I want it to be sharp is when I'm filming, not when I'm playing things back. Dude, pants!
No, I'm not taking a picture of the pants.
It's gross.
Make me do this.
It's gross, so it's art.
No.
No, then give me the camera. I'll take the picture.
Right off.
So an issue that I've had and many people have had with Sony cameras over the years, if you're in mixed artificial lighting, the auto white balance will just guess wrong a lot of the time. So what Sony's done to address that is they actually have a white balance sensor in this camera, which should help quite a bit. So to do a little experiment here, we've got an LED light. It's set at 2800 Kelvin, so quite warm right now, and it's doing an okay job. I still find it's a little warm, maybe a little bit pink, but what I'm gonna do now is change the white balance so you'll be able to see how quickly it can respond and how accurately. So we're gonna bring it up to daylight right now. Okay, so once we've jumped over here, you can see it takes it a little bit of time before it corrects, which is okay. You don't want it suddenly quickly jumping between different white balances, but it's a little slow in my opinion. On top of that, if you're doing any kind of tracking shots where you're moving through different light sources, you might find that it's still a little bit too slow to respond. But let's throw it all the way up to 6500, so a very blue light. And you can see the exact same thing again. It takes quite a while before it responds to it. I still think, unless I needed to move through a variety of light sources, I would go back to setting my white balance manually. A lot of the time you'll even have to dial in the tint a little bit to get the best results out of this camera. Hey everyone, this is your mid-episode reminder to subscribe. If we get to 181,000 subscribers by November 24th, Chris will have to pronounce Nikon Nikon.
Nikon.
Whatever. One big feature that we weren't able to test before the a7S III is the raw video feed that comes out of the luscious full-size HDMI port on this camera. And now we've got support in Atomos for that, and it is really nice what's coming out of it. You still get tons of dynamic range, but it's easier to work with log video. Real drawback though is this is one of those cameras that doesn't support dialing in the ISO or the white balance after the fact, so you still have to get it pretty close to right in camera. So the raw video is nice, but it doesn't give you the huge benefits of RAW that we typically expect, and that's a bit of a disappointment. Good news is it's only a few software updates away from becoming much more usable. Okay, let's talk about low light performance, and you know what that means. We're going to do another high ISO ramp up. We're going to start at 3200 ISO and just crank it up to God knows what until I'm properly exposed in this dark alley here. Now, the S in A7S series stands for sensitivity. You get very low noise, but also the noise we do see has kind of a very organic film kind of look without a lot of color noise in it. Now, I do still find about 51,000 ISO is about as far as I do want to push this camera. Once we go past that, it might be useful in an emergency, extremely low light situations, but I wouldn't use it professionally. So instead of just running a bunch of tests, it's been a real pleasure with the a7S III that I've been able to use it to shoot a few episodes, and having that fully articulating screen, excellent battery life, and autofocus I can constantly depend on has been a pleasure. And hey, now the menus and interface are actually kind of fun to use. If I were shooting a short film or something like that, I still think I might lean towards an S1H for having the better assist tools and the sharper video, but for run and gun videography, this is the best camera out there right now. And yes, I did have some issues with this camera, the white balance responsiveness, some of the autofocus jitters, and some of the RAW functionality not being fully supported, but that's all stuff that could get fixed in firmware. I think this is an excellent camera. Sure, it's a little expensive, but nothing else can do what it can. Remember guys, subscribe so we can get Chris doing his Nikon pronunciation, whatever that is, and we will see you all again very soon with more DP Review TV.